It's time to learn from the best game devs. Tony Chan here, and welcome to episode 86 of Game Dev Loadout, where I chat with inspiring professionals every Wednesday morning to bring you the motivation and tactics for a successful gaming career. Now let's chat with today's guest, Nick Culbertson. Nick, it is a game time. Are you ready?
I'm totally ready.
Oh, yeah. See, I like that energy already. Nick is the host of a new game developer podcast called Game Dev Deconstructed, where he explores the process of game development, providing you with an in-depth tactical blueprint for navigating the game industry. He is also an indie developer and the founder of a Moby Pixel that specializes in making music apps and rhythm games. So go ahead, Nick, give us a bit about your personal life and how you got started in the game industry.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. So a little background about me is I came to games as not sort of my first interest or my first love. I lived in Nashville and I was a musician there playing guitar for country artists. A lot of times it was young artists that were trying to break into the industry. Think Taylor Swift, but without the success. And then I started making iPad apps. My wife got me an iPad for Christmas one year, and as a touring musician, in town, a lot of times you're just playing on the weekends. So that left me during the week to basically learn how to make apps. And from there, I just kept on any idea I had for an app. I would create it and throw it at the wall and see what stuck. And ultimately, fast forward a few years, I moved to Dallas and I was having coffee with a friend and I was talking about how I wanted to get more into game development because I'd made some small games like a card matching game and a beer pong game. And he said, well, why don't you combine your interests of, you're a good developer and you're a good musician. And while you may not be, the best developer or best musician, you're going to be a better musician than most developers. And you're also going to be a better developer than most musicians. So I sort of combine those two. And now everything that I'm doing is music and game related or music and app related. And that's about me.
So you moved, you're still in Dallas right now?
I'm still in Dallas right now. Yeah. So started in Nashville. My wife was getting her PhD in anthropology at SMU, that's in Dallas. And so I knew my days as a country guitar player were numbered. So I didn't know at the time we'd be moving to Dallas. So actually, there are plenty of country guitar players here. I probably could have stuck with that trade. But because there was an expiration date, I started thinking I need to learn to do other things. And that's where making apps, it was just the right time and then a natural step to start focusing on games.
Wow. So how is the Dallas game community over there?
The Dallas gaming community is awesome. There's a group here called Dallas Society of Play that, they're really champions for all the games that are coming out of Dallas. And we've had some big name games that have been released from here. A Dark Room for iOS came out of here. Warbits, which was an editor's choice, came out last year from Dallas. Most recently, Inner Space just came out, and that game was released on the Switch and is getting a lot of notoriety. And so, yeah, it's a really vibrant scene. It's cool to be a part of. I'm not privy to how cool the scene is in Austin. I don't think it quite compares with that. But it feels like I know everyone in this community and they sort of know me. And it's really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because, in Texas, Austin is the big one. And then it's Dallas. And I'm in Houston, so we're all close to each other. And I do wish that Houston was more bigger in the game. But it's all good. Like Dallas and Austin, they're doing it for us.
Well, I think Houston might be big for it, but I think that the community outreach might not be there yet. I had a friend here who got big in the startup community whenever it was first getting big in Dallas. And he talked about at first when he was going to meetings, there were just like 6 people there. And now the startup community is over 6,000 people in Dallas. And it's not that there are that many more startups happening here. It's just there are more people who are coming to these events and are self-identifying as being a startup. Whereas previously, you're a small business owner, you're not a startup. And I think it's the same thing for game developers. There are people who are working on projects but haven't released stuff. Maybe they're modding stuff for Counter-Strike or something. And whenever you have a community together through a site like Meetup, it really helps facilitate this growth. And it just, I've noticed that with these Meetup groups, like 3 years ago, there wasn't really a presence, but through sites like Meetup and this group, Dallas Society of Play, it's grown to where there are hundreds of members now.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Houston do have a group right now, and it's slowly growing. So that's the great thing about it. And as you mentioned, you game developers, you definitely want to join like a meetup.com and just hang out with local communities that have the same interests as you. So let's go ahead and move on. Well, what do you consider your main area of expertise as of today?
So I think what I'm good at is creating digital products from start to finish. So I do the marketing, the programming, the designing, most of the art, depending on the project. And some people do all those things, but they really excel at one. And I think I'm above average at each, so it's sort of like the skill there is being just a little bit better. And if I did have to pin it down to one specific skill, I think that I'm good at iterating my workflow based on the input I get of putting something out. So if I put out something and I see that it's resonating with people, then I'll sort of feed off of what the good parts are.
Oh, now this is going to be interesting because you're like the first at working like solo and is confidence, in your ability to get stuff out there. So I'm really curious. You're working on a game solo. Like, what is something we probably don't know about, but should when we work on a game solo from start to finish, get it published, get it out there and market it? Like, what is something we probably don't know, but should?
Well, one thing that, there are several things, and this is one thing that's been a harsh reality for me, especially in mobile games, is that if you release a game in the digital age, that means that your product is never done. Not to date the podcast, but iPhone 10 just came out this past year, and it totally redesigned the way that the iPhone screen looks. And that means a lot of people were either A, scrambling to update their app to fit this new aspect ratio, or B, they're just not going to update their app, and ultimately it's not going to be in the marketplace or be getting featured anymore. That's something else that happened this past year. Again, dating it. I do apologize for that. But they just got rid of ARC32 support apps for the App Store. So a lot of developers who didn't update their old games, those games were taken off of the App Store and will not be downloaded anymore until those developers go in and update them, which is very different from how games used to be. If you have an old NES, you might have to blow in the cartridge, but you can put Mario Brothers in there and still play it, But I tried to turn this, what I perceive as a negative, as a positive, in saying that, isn't it great that we work in a medium where you're allowed to improve on your art over time after it's released to the public? Everywhere else, if you're writing a book or if you're painting a picture, once it's out in the wild, it's out in the wild and there's no changing it. But with apps, people are going to remember your current version, less so than version 1.2 where you fix some small bug.
Yeah, and that's a great way to look at it, where for one, it makes you stay on track of, I guess, the trends or the updates that's coming out. Like, you got to stay, I guess, on par with the technology that's coming out. So, know when to update or when to update your game. And then, you're improving your art. Like, game to me is already art itself. And so you're able to update it to make it better or fix bugs or whatever you want to do to make your game better. So that's a great way to look at it. What mistakes are most common even at a pro level as working solo?
So I've seen this with myself because you're so focused on creating the product. A lot of people will market what they're creating too late in the process. Where really, even when you're prototyping, you should be sharing things on social media and trying to grow some buzz about your game. Because as a small independent person, you have to be your number one cheerleader. And so I think that's the mistake, is people wait till their product is done and then they start marketing it instead of doing it earlier in the process. Another thing is that people in general in mobile, I think they take too long to ship their games. And that could be because their scope is too large, or because feature creep sets in, or any of these other long list of things. Not having experience with making games, probably your first game is going to take you 3 times as long as you initially thought it was, probably for some stupid bug like trying to figure out how notifications work, or in-app purchases, or things like that.
Yeah. You just gotta start small. Definitely start small, especially if it's a mobile game. Yeah, make a small game. And I really want your help to nail this down, like marketing. So crucial. How do we get these game devs to realize that you gotta start early? Like, you gotta market early. Like, what kind of advice you want to give them?
Well, I think one thing is you have to convince yourself that people want to hear about your game and they want to hear your story. I think if you're a person like me, you spend too much time trying to perfectly craft your message. And for me, before with, marketing a game, it would be basically, game is done, send out a post about it. Now I'm done. Marketing finished. Hopefully it's successful. But whereas now I'm trying to have it be a part of my working flow, that I'm talking about the process of creating the art, because process is art in and of itself. And people are really interested in it, which is another reason why we gravitate towards podcasts, is because it's super interesting to hear how people are operating. So what piece of advice would I have? For me personally, like I mentioned, it was difficult for me at first to talk about my product or my process before the product was finished. So one thing I started to do is I started to automate posts. That way I knew that if I was in crunch mode and I wasn't able to focus on social media, at least my account wasn't sitting totally dormant. But you don't want to post something that's just noise, that's not, talking about your product, or isn't adding value to people. And during one soul-searching moment, I realized that, I might not have to be talking about my game. I can just write something positive or motivational, and those things always add value to people's lives. And so that's another way that you can use your platform to not only talk about your game, but to just give a positive message.
I like that. Yeah, that's awesome. Spread some positivity in the world. That's so cool. Overall, what are key principles for working better solo? And would you recommend working solo?
If you can do it, I would. One problem I've heard about working solo before is that you end up creating a product that only you could make, which sounds good on one hand, but also that means it's limited to only your vision instead of this shared experience that could be created. So there are some downsides to it. It's not all, the perfect mix, but you don't have to deal with, the politics of having a partner. So there are also some pros, but some key things that I would say is, and I've seen other people in my position sort of go astray with this, is stop being so distracted. You have to understand your own psyche and realize that sometimes things like Facebook or not being focused on a task are going to pull you away from doing what you ultimately want to do. And I think trying to block out those distractions can be huge. The other thing is learning to say no to your other ideas, because creating games, something that draws people to that is they want to solve interesting problems. And whenever you've been working on solving this same problem for a couple of months, it's no longer as enticing as whenever that idea was initially brand new. So it really takes discipline to, one, not get distracted and stay focused on the task at hand. And two, don't get pulled away by these other ideas that are floating away. There will be time for those later, but finish this thing you're working on.
Yeah, stick to your original idea, because that future creep is real. Like it happens.
Yeah, for sure. Well, even to the point where sometimes you get to a part that's hard in a game, and rather than facing it head on, you think, oh man, I just want to go make something else for a while. So you start, you're hacking on another game, and then you realize, I don't really want to go back to that first game. I want to work on this new game because that's what's giving me joy. And if that is your goal, is just to feel good while you're making games, I think there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to ship product at the end of the day, it's good to just really focus in and find a way to get the work done without being pulled in all these different directions. And it's like working out a muscle. If you get distracted regularly while you're working, then you're going to get distracted more regularly while you're working. But if you have laser-like focus of this task that you're working on, then after, it might take a while, but eventually you'll be able to say no to, I do want to see which Game of Thrones character I'm most like, or things like that on Facebook.
Yeah, stay focused, Game Dev. Stay focused. Now, let's take this on a more personal level. And since you've been making apps, rhythm games, what was the worst moment of your career? That one moment that's still vivid in your mind. Be very detailed and tell us that personal story.
So whenever I first started making apps, I thought the natural thing that I think most software developers would think is that, I need to get some clients, so I'll make some products for clients. So I started making some client apps, and when I was starting out, I was actually charging $500 for a finished app, which, if you don't know the mobile market, that's maybe a day's worth of work that should be paying for. But at the time, I was also way over delivering. So for that $500, I was, putting in a couple weeks of work, which I don't know. That's neither here nor there. But the worst moment about it was there were some clients that I was making apps for that the app never got finished because they just fell off the face of the earth. They stopped contacting me, and I don't think it was because they were unhappy with the work. I mean, they were going to get an app for $500 that was a top quality app. I think they just lost interest in the idea of having an app altogether. And this happened to me probably 3 or 4 times. And it wasn't just like some thrown together app. I was in music at that time. So the natural thing for me to do was to make music apps. And in 2 cases, it's weird, this happened twice, I got to where the project was almost done, and the person who had hired me was like, I was wondering if we could put like a game in there or something. And so 2 times I coded a game into the app. I made a beer pong game inside of an artist app, and I made like a little Mario Kart-esque racing game in there. And in both of those cases, those people walked away, and I wasn't paid from it. Yeah. So that was pretty excruciating. And so by the time I moved to Texas, I was done entirely with client apps.
Jeez. All right. So let's put this from a game dev's perspective. Like, say that we take up like a freelance work. What should we take away from that experience if we're, taking clients' work or doing freelance?
Yeah, so totally. Well, the one thing is never make a handshake deal. You have to treat this like a business, even if you're working with your friends. And it doesn't take long to just go online and draft up an informal contract. And if nothing else, that'll help you establish what each party expects to have done before you start work on something. But the other thing, there's a positive takeaway from it too, is that because I was open to having these experiences, I was able to explore things that were outside of my comfort zone. Otherwise, I would have just been trying to solve whatever problem was closest to me. But ultimately, the reason I guess I'm making games, and the reason that some of my other products that I've released that have been successful, is because they first started out in being in these client apps that either I finished for a very low nominal fee, or that the person just walked away and never paid.
And there you go again. Like you're taking that negative and turning it into a positive. And so, yeah, you're not letting it push you down or hold you down or anything. Like you're still pushing forward and making games and apps.
I was listening to something recently that talks about just sort of different chemicals in the brain that have to do with happiness and stress and things like that. And I think trying to turn a negative into a positive is a coping mechanism for lowering cortisol so that you're not feeling so stressed. And it helps you to resolve those things, because another response is I could just be bitter about these people who had stiffed me. Or the time has passed. If I get mad about it, the only thing that's doing is bad for me. Those people don't care that they stiff me, and the reason they stiff me is because I didn't have a contract. If I gotten paid ahead of time, you better believe they would have had the finished app at the end of the day. So I think working some of those things out, something else, like I do hire independent contractors now to work on some of my games. And when I do that, I now have a contract. I pay them half up front and I pay them half when the job's finished.
Nice. Yeah. And real quick, Game Devs, me and Nick, we actually have a lot in common. Like, we're a big fan of Tim Ferriss and Gary Vaynerchuk. And so, hearing you talk about how you turn the science behind it and the reasoning is just like me. Like, I used to be bitter, but now I'm just, when something bad happens, I just try to put it in a positive light. Cause like you said, there's nothing good to come out of thinking something negative or something bad about a situation. You just gotta keep pushing forward and try to make something positive out of it, for sure.
Yeah, one last example with like what you were just saying is I've heard it illustrated as it's like you're drinking poison trying to hurt the other person. So ultimately you're only hurting yourself whenever you're mad and you're venting about this person, but you're wanting to do harm to them, realizing that you're just, we all have the same number of hours in the day. You can spend those feeling good about things or feeling bad about things, but we all have the same time. Yeah,
and we spread some positivity, guys, not negativity. I don't want to sound corny, but I just being positive. It just makes lives better. So yeah, be positive. What are bad recommendations do you hear in your profession?
Okay, so this is where it starts to get interesting, and it has to do with how people conceptualize game development. And I think we might go into that a little bit more. But one of the bad recommendations is just this assumption that you have to suffer to make great art. And the other thing is that things like shortcuts somehow make you less of a game developer to other people. And that's something that I've sort of been thinking a lot about lately, is what it means to be a game developer, because that term has a lot of different definitions. But as I said, we will go into that more. But suffice to say for now, the assumption that you have to suffer to make great art, I think is wrong. And that is a message that we get loud and clear. And the other thing is that you have to really, you can't make shortcuts to make great art too. I think that's false as well.
So give us an example. What do you mean by shortcuts?
Right. Sort of something that's changed in the last few years in my mind. And what it is I'm in the process, and this is also, it's something that bear with me. I'm going to try to explain it, but I'm still in the process of understanding this myself and forming the ideas. But I think that game dev is three things at the same time. One, it is a process. So it's game development. You are creating something. It is a process, an occupation that makes sense. Number two is it's an identity whenever you're a game developer. And this one is a little more of a fluid concept. And the third thing, game dev is a marketing term, and it's a term that is marketed towards us. But when someone comes into game development, and this has to do with the identity portion. When someone comes into game development and they don't have their own set of principles or beliefs about what it means to be a game developer, they show up and they start to take on other people's values as their own, because you want to be a member of the herd. If you want to be accepted by other people, you have to take on their crafted identity about this thing. And then what happens is new members try to come in, and then you pass those same values on to these newcomers. And it becomes this echo chamber for this identity of what it means to be a game dev. And this sounds like a good thing. It's part of being, and it is good for the positive things, but part of our crafted identity for what it means to be a game dev is, one, untrue, and two, is toxic. So the idea that I don't know if you see this a lot with game dev, but I certainly have, where sometimes it feels like there's a witch hunt, that people are looking for someone who is not a valid game developer. An example of this is, I guess I won't drop his name, but a friend of mine created a mobile game that was a port that someone else had created. And once people find out that he didn't create the original game, but instead had just ported it, even though he had added some code to it, suddenly in their eyes, he's no longer a game developer. Or say, for example, you're making a game, but you hire an offshore team to make that game. Well, you're not really a game developer. So there are these things where people start to try to define for you what a game developer is. And for me, that really gives me pause and makes me want to sort of tear down all the assumptions I have of what it means to be a game developer and try and rebuild it from piece to piece. Because I think there is a wide range. It has to do, like, even with the startup community. Right now, you could identify yourself as being a game developer and you've never shipped a game before. And in my mind, that's okay. More power to those people. And I don't think it's our place to then go to that person and be like, well, no, you can't call yourself a game dev. You're not a part of this herd because, one, you haven't suffered, two, you haven't created a product. Or, yeah. So I'm getting a little rambly on this point. So do you have any specific questions about the direction with it?
No, I completely understand what you mean, because you're saying like they're labeling us if we don't do like I guess a certain part of game development, like marketing, I guess is a good example. It's not, you're not technically developing the game, but you're a part of the process.
Yeah. And there's another person who you had interviewed on your podcast, and I can't remember his name, but he was on your website. You have an intro, where to start with your podcast. And there are 3 episodes there that are great episodes. And in one of them, I think it was the 3rd episode, you had just mentioned mobile games, and the developer was a little bit like, like, you could over the microphone, you could hear his skin crawling, because the idea of mobile games was somehow impure, and it was not. That's not his game dev. That's someone else's game dev. The other idea is that if you're creating art for profit, that is seen as bad to a lot of game developers. And there are other positive things with it too, though. I mean, game dev says that your heart has to be pure and the thing that you're creating has to be authentic. But it also has some things that are untrue that say, if you work hard and, all these things you've done right, then you will succeed, which is ignoring the fact that it's an oversaturated market and that people can be more than just a game dev. Like, you're a game dev, but you're also a podcaster, and you're also a father, and you're also all these other things that are your interest. And I feel like for a lot of the crafted identity I see for game dev, it's not super open for being inclusive for these things.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. And these people that I guess are labeling, would you consider them other game devs or more just gamers, or people that play games? Who
I really think it is not even them. It's the inner game dev in me. It's because I will go on Reddit and read forum posts and see how people are responding to other game devs. And because I want to still be a part of this community, there's sort of cognitive dissonance that's going on in my mind where I think, well, I don't necessarily agree with what this person's thinking, but I'm new to game dev, so maybe this is just the way it is. And I think a lot of these assumptions I released a full title that had taken me 10 months to make and to ship. And whenever I was done with it, I was left with more questions than I was with answers. And so it led me to a whole lot of soul searching with this to try and rediscover, why do I want to make games, and what does game dev look like specifically on my terms and not the terms of the people who came before me? Because what their values aren't necessarily my values. Another thing is, with monetizing apps, I think absolutely you should be monetizing your apps and games. Like, you want to do this for a living, you have to make money from it. That is a necessary evil of it. But also, your art is good. Feel like it's good enough to where you can actually charge somebody with it and not feel like you've somehow cheapened the experience or exploited people by having something like an ad banner pop up in your game, or by having an in-app purchase or consumables. So, and also mobile games are they're a relatively young medium. So it does still feel like it's kind of the Wild West out there. I know I'm rambling on this one. I do apologize for that.
It's really good to hear. And I'm with you. Like, I'm okay with mobile games. Like, I have nothing against mobile games, and I have friends that were against mobile games because they just I don't know why they don't consider it a real game or something like that. And I'm just like, what? It's a game, and for one, to me, the mobile game opened up the market for everyone to play a game. Like, kids are playing games. Like, it just makes it easier for everyone to play. So to me, like, it widened the appeal of video games. And to me, that's an awesome thing. And now the new iPhone, they have AR coming out, or they're trying to do something with AR. So that's going to further push the game, direction. And so I see nothing but positive, things from it. And of course, some people say like the monetization strategies or the ad strategies, like it's falling towards the consoles, I guess you could say. And that's true, but I don't think it's like, I just don't think it's a big deal. And I think gamers, like, what happened with Battlefront 2 and stuff, what the loot crate and pay for win, like, that's not all games like that. I think that's like one of the games out of many that does something like that. And the gamers are speaking against it. So I'm pretty sure they're not going to do it again, or maybe they will. I don't know. But it's, to me, a mobile game, it's nothing but positivity. Like, it helped grow the industry huge, like billions of dollars. Like,
absolutely. And it opened it up to people. Like, I created a game that both of my parents played, and that is incredible. Like, if I had made a game for a console, there's no way they were going to play it, and also, creating a casual game, to me, I think is great. You're making it accessible to people who don't self-identify as being a hardcore gamer. And, I don't think I play a lot of games, a lot of old school retro games, but I don't think I would identify myself as a hardcore gamer. That just sounds like migraine inducing, maybe at an earlier point in my life, I was hardcore, but at that point I was hardcore about non-hardcore games like Super Mario Kart.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like the Nintendo Wii, it's a really big appeal to the casual. And to me, like, the Nintendo Wii was one of the most funnest console I ever played, because I was playing with my whole family. Like, we were playing Wii Sports and Wii Resort, and it was just a ton of fun. And just seeing my family get into video games was awesome to look at, and other people as well. So nothing but great things. Like, it sucks that, I know what you mean when other people hate on the mobile market or see it as a different thing, but you gotta see it in a positive light, man. They help the game industry grow huge amount.
Yeah, I totally agree with that idea, 100%. And I think as game developers, we don't have to be, ignoring the fact that most apps financially will fail, but we should be championing other people's successes and other people's releases. And I think that helps the community as a whole, and not just being totally self-interested in what other people are doing.
Yes, support the community. I think it will continue to grow no matter what. Like, I'm pretty sure it's just going to keep going further and further. So I can't wait to see what the mobile market is going to bring. Especially, more people are making games and AR and VR as well. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. now that you're more experienced, you're more better, and yeah, you definitely have like a great point of view of the video game industry. Like, what was one of the best investment you've ever made? It can be investment of money, time, or energy. What was that investment?
Yeah. So for me, as personally, it's been spending time with my daughter. I have a daughter that's just over 1 year old right now, and working for myself and running my own business. I've been able to be with her 365 days last year. And, I had a friend tell me that you'll never look back on your life later on and be like, you know what? I wish I hadn't spent as much time with my kids when they were younger. So that's what's been super valuable to me, is just being able to experience her. And it's really changed my perspective on a lot of things. But from a game dev or any sort of development standpoint, the thing that has been greatly impacting me this year is something called Nerd Body. So I'll tell you about this thing, just a brief elevator pitch of it. And I'm not paid by Nerd Body or anything, but in this co-working space I work out of, there's another company that's called Nerd Body. And what it is you get an email or a text message 4 times a day that just has you stand up from your computer and do resistance band trainings. So it's just 1 to 2 minute workouts that gets the blood flowing. It gets the blood out of your brain so that you're not feeling there sitting lethargic all day. And I swear, since I started doing that, I've felt so much more energy once I get done with my workday. Before I was doing, and this is sort of with game development and with a lot of tech jobs, you're sitting at a computer for most of the day. And even if you go to the gym at night, that doesn't give you immunity for all those hours that you spent just sitting there staring at your computer. So I don't think people have to specifically do Nerd Body to get value from that, but getting up and getting the blood flowing. So even if it's just getting up and stretching, getting up, do 15 push-ups real quick, and then 2 hours later, get up and do, 20 sit-ups or something. Getting that blood moving, it fuels your brain and it allows you to focus on the things that really matter instead of just going down that dark hole of the internet and, spending time on Facebook or trying to get quick dopamine hits from things that don't necessarily matter.
Yeah. Taking breaks. Yeah. Doing something, just anything that would help. Because sitting down all day, it's just not healthy at all. What was the greatest idea you had to date? Like an aha moment?
So that was a moment that I discussed earlier when I had coffee with one of my friends who had said, you're a musician, you're a developer, you should combine those two interests into one field. And I think that has become my superpower. And I recommend other people do that too, because as quote unquote game devs, I know people have a lot of different hobbies. Some of the people that I've spoken with, one of them is a rugby coach. Another one is doing Tai Chi. Another one is super fascinated with chickens. So,
Chicken. I was laughing a lot when I heard that your episode on that.
Yeah. So if you can combine those things, then it gives you a unique view other than, I'm going to make a killer game. And my perspective is I'm just going to make a killer game that's better than everyone else's game. Instead, take yourself and put it into the product you're creating, because maybe there are other people that have those interests too, and it might resonate with them.
Back to the chicken, like the guy, he's like, he grown chicken. No, he was given a chicken, correct? And he took care of it. He grew it. Like he spent time with it every single day. He eats chicken though, which was surprising, but
that's what I thought too. Yeah. He probably eats more fried chicken than anyone I know, or at least did last year. But yeah, he's a super interesting dude.
Yeah, Raising Cane's is his favorite, store, fast food and stuff. It was just really funny because y'all talking about it for a long time, and this guy just kept. You could tell he was passionate about chicken for sure.
That's right. Yeah, and that's cool. I want people to talk about what they're passionate about, and he even said that's what he's put in his game. So I don't know if it was in his latest game he made, but some of his other games, the starring character, it's always you're going to find a chicken in his games.
Oh man, such a funny thing. With the game industry booming every year, what are you most excited about today?
Yeah, what I'm excited about is seeing where mobile gaming is going to go, because I don't think mobile is done. And I sort of have a contrarian mindset about it. So whenever I hear other developers saying, oh man, mobile games, they suck. Like, you shouldn't do mobile games. They exploit people. They're addictive. Well, eventually those people are going to be making mobile games too. So it makes me think that there's going to be even more people focused on creating games for mobile in the future. And I think, with some of these things that are, clickbaity games or things where you're blocking the player out unless they watch a preview video, some of those things I think are going to fall to the wayside, and the cream eventually will rise to the top. The gamers will determine what they like and don't like, and will be discerning enough to know which product is good and which one is just trying to exploit our human weaknesses. But I think that a lot of more gamers and game devs are going to find their way to mobile and realize that it's actually a really interesting platform to be creating for.
Yeah, and what do you want to tell those people that think it's oversaturated? Now, it is obviously oversaturated, but like, how would you persuade someone to, start? Because mobile games are probably the first thing that someone should start off with, because it's easy to make. How would you persuade someone to make a game for that market? Because their main excuse would be, oh, it's oversaturated. To get discovered on a mobile is hard as well.
Right. Well, I mean, it kind of depends. I mean, the first thing is, whenever you're making games, you should start small and just create something, because chances are it's not going to be that great. And, you might have a huge idea for this game that you want to ultimately make, but you need to solve some of these smaller problems first and go through the steps of creating something so you can better understand how to make a game in the first place. And unless you've walked those steps, you don't have that knowledge yet. And then you can get in I know a scenario of a guy who's making a game here in Dallas, and he's been working on it for over 3 years. And the game's going to be incredible, but had he created and shipped more games, maybe he could have shaved off, 1 year, 2 years off that project. So I think yes, it's oversaturated, but a lot of those games people are never going to download and they're never going to care about. So if what you're creating you really care about and you're going to tell people about it, you can hopefully set it up in a way that's going to be a win-win for you, where even if you don't get, thousands of downloads and you don't get to quit your full-time job, at least you have expressed yourself in a medium that allows you to express yourself that in a way nothing else can.
Definitely. What is that one game that influenced you the most, and why?
Yeah, so we had an NES when I was growing up, so a lot of those are muddled together between, like, Punch-Out was great, of course the Mario games and Mega Man games, but I think the first one I really got lost in was Legend of Zelda, like the very first one. Legend of Zelda, what it did is it put you in a world where you could become someone else for a piece of time. Similar, I think, for other people whenever they were reading books, where it's just a real escapist sort of mindset. And I think that momentary shift in an identity was groundbreaking for me, and it still is now, that I can pick up a game and just be transported to a different world. And Legend of Zelda was the first place I did that. And that's probably why I'm still gravitate to, like, the pixel art style games.
Yeah, such an amazing game. Why do you love being a part of the video game industry?
Yeah, what I really like about it is that it starts out with just one idea of something you have, and then you get to look at the end of what you want to create. And then all along the way, you're solving interesting problems that are helping you get to this finished game. And it's a real rush for me whenever you're solving something. Like you're thinking, oh man, I need to have, something where on the end of this level, I need to have sort of a twist ending where now that suddenly there's a second boss you have to beat. And things like that they're quirky and they make it super interesting. Or what I've been working on most recently is a puzzle game. So it's really cool to add new mechanics in there and think how like, oh, this new mechanic just changed the entire game and the entire way I conceptualize this game. And so that's such a rush. The other part of it is that, you've heard chefs say that this is me on a plate. That's their goal. Well, that's what I want to do whenever I create a game. I want to put all of my passions, all of my interests, and all of my dreams into something. And then that's me in a game. Not that it is me specifically, but these are the things that I value. These are my worldview and things that I think are cool. And hopefully it resonates and elicits a response out of the person that's playing it.
Man, you really go deep with these philosophies, huh?
Yeah. Well, I spent a lot of time thinking about it because, like I said, after I finished one of my games, I released it and there was an identity crisis. It was suddenly I'm not the person who is working on X game anymore. Now I feel like my product is out in the wild. I'm exposed. Where do I go from here? And part of that was trying to build a foundation of how do I view games moving forward.
Wow, deep. Awesome. Before we go into the lightning round game devs, don't forget that my website, GameDevLoadout.com, will have all the show notes and the resources mentioned today. So just type in the number 86 in the search bar to find Nick's episode. And now, Nick, are you ready to crush the lightning round?
I am ready.
Let's do this. What was holding you back from joining the game industry?
For me, it was just time. I was busy throwing other digital products at the wall. And then I think Unity came out, and that was the first place I started making games. And it just made that transition so obtainable.
Wow. And that time now, because you have a daughter. How is developing a game with a daughter been like?
Yeah. So at first, whenever I had her, I had started working on a game 1 hour a day. Because I took off maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months of time after she was born. And I got to a point where, okay, I'm just going to go in for an hour a day and work on something new. And that's what I was doing. And so I'd go in there for an hour, I'd turn on the music, and I'd start, instantly trying to solve problems to make a game. And I would, export a build at the end of each day so I could see where I had built to at that point. It worked out really well, except for there's one problem that I made with that game. I forgot to find the fun in the game early on. So I was working on all these systems for finishing the game. And then as I was getting closer to finishing it, I was thinking, oh, well, I've ignored, it was a rhythm game. And I was thinking, I've ignored some of the most key principles of making a rhythm game, which is that it's fun to play. And so that was my initial approach. How has that now changed with a 1-year-old daughter? Well, Nerd Body has helped greatly because I have a lot of energy and focus I can put in my limited number of hours. But I try to write out all the different things that I want to be working on next. And I have action items for each of those different tasks. So I can work on something from 6:30 in the morning till 2 p.m. and then be done. And then whenever 6:30 rolls around again, because I've written out exactly which item I'm working on next, I can pick up right where I left off.
Oh, yeah, that's a great habit to have. Yeah, writing your goals down or your action items every single day and getting it done. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Yeah, let's see. I think that has been making a game that only you can make. And what I mean by that is using your different experiences and what your dreams are and your vision for something and create that thing instead of trying to create the next Call of Duty or the next big title, because those people are trying to create a product that's going to make the most amount of money from their users. And you're in a unique position where you're creating an independent project that can be for a very underserved market. And that underserved market is probably people like you. So create something that resonates with them, make the game that only you can make.
So how you say it, like the you in the game, or what was the phrase again? Like you say the chef in food.
So a chef says that this is me on a plate. So I say this is me in a game.
Gotcha. What's a great marketing tip to make yourself and your game stand out?
Yeah, so I think it's not so much a big step that's different from what everyone's doing, but I think you should just tell your story early on and then be engaging with the community, because if you're engaging with community and someone retweets something you said, then suddenly you have a chance of their fans becoming your fans, and it can just sort of have a slow growth on itself. But none of that's going to happen unless you start telling that story from very, very early in the process. And the other thing that I've been hearing from people I've been interviewing is get your product out to public places. Have actual people playing your game, because you don't know who might show up. Like at a convention, you might have someone who's from the local press and they might do a write-up. Or it might be someone who's a representative for Apple or one of these companies. You never really know until you get your product in front of people and you watch them engage with it.
Well, I just want to quickly mention, like what you just said, where if you post on social media, you just never know when someone might pick it up and it helps you out. So one of my past guests, Tommy Rockham, he actually promoted his game early. Like he did all the right stuff. He promoted his game early. He posted on social media, and the publisher eventually saw his game, and the publisher is not funding the game. Like you just never know. Yeah, like that's all he did. He was just posting, promoting his game on social media and putting it out there, and a publisher came on by and offering him to do this and that. So that's just one of the potentials of you promoting your game early. Like you just never know when the right eyes is on it. You just got to put your game out there. So it's you just never know. What resources should we use to get started today?
Yeah, so I would, I use a lot of different things for making games. Most recently, I've been really getting pleasure in using Pico 8 to create small games. But I think if someone were brand new to this, I would say pick up Unity. Unity their mission is to democratize game development and make it accessible for everyone. You can get started with it for free. They also have an amazing asset store. So if you want to have a platformer game, you can probably go drop a few bucks and have that whole system ready to go in your game.
Definitely, yeah. Just get started, Game Dev. Unity is free. Download it. Now, this next question is a bit of a doozy. So take your time if you need to, all right? Imagine you woke up the next morning in a brand new world and you knew no one. You still have all the experience and knowledge you currently have today. Your food and shelter is taken care of and you have a laptop. What would you do with step by step on the path to join and become successful in the game industry?
I would throw as much stuff at the wall as I could just immediately out the gate and taking good quality shots on the goal. With creating a lot of different products, you really don't know which one's going to stick and which one's not going to. And that's the reason that I've been able to be independent for the last 7 years, is because I threw something at the wall early on and it stuck, and I stuck with that. And I think you really don't know what is going to be successful until you've given yourself opportunity to be successful in a lot of different arenas, which is sort of counter to other messages that maybe I've even mentioned earlier, to just focus on one thing. Well, I do think you should focus on one thing, but I think you should get that thing out quickly, learn from it, and then go on to the next thing and keep on trying to put stuff out until you see something that might stick or people might be gravitating to, and then you can put more of your time resources into that.
Yeah, great advice. You just, that's what I tell Game Devs. You just got to keep creating something and finish the game. You just got to finish the game and put it out there and see what the people think. But we have reached the end. Go and give us one last parting piece of guidance and how we can connect with you, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, so, well, you can connect with me. My social media handle is at Moby Pixel. That's my game development brand. As Tony mentioned, I also have a game dev podcast. So after this, we're going to be talking with him. So hopefully people can jump back and forth and listen to these interviews. So, and then also, let's see, what else can I say? Guidance, just make good shots on goal and do game dev on your own terms.
Yeah, Nick, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. Guys, definitely check out his podcast. I will link everything up, so go check it out, Game Dev Deconstructed. So subscribe to that. And if, you were mentioning the chicken story, so definitely check out that episode. So thanks again, Nick. We are truly grateful, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you so much, Tony. Goodbye.
Thank you, Game Devs, for listening. I hope we brought you value today. Equip yourself with the best loadout and take action. If you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast with iTunes or Castbox to listen to more inspiring stories and gain valuable knowledge. I greatly appreciate it if you share the show with your fellow peers so that they can also be motivated. Until then, I'm your host, Tony Chan, and I'll catch you next Wednesday on the Game Dev Loadout podcast. Peace.